Hi, everyone. We're here with one great guest, Matt Zakreski. And I'm super, super excited personally to invite him on board because he's a very embodied person. And he's one of the people that you listen to him or you just watch him. I actually haven't done this, but if you probably mute one of his talks, you'll still be like, I want to know more.
Please don't mute me, please.
That's not the idea. But I mean, I think it's a great way to transmit, right? From this, not just the mind, which of course is valuable in itself, but this is one of the things that we talk about in this embodiment world, to be able to digest that down and integrate that into the body. And at the end of the day, bringing it into your life, because that's, at the end of the day, that's what we want, right?
Right.
And even though there's lots of healing modalities out there, lots of options, lots of tools, lots of teachers, what we want to do is be able to not just stick new information somewhere in our minds, but actually have a better relationship with, your family, your friends, your partners, or wherever it is that you want to bring that into. So very, very happy to welcome you, Matt.
Well, I'm so happy to be here. This is something I've been looking forward to for a long time. So
great. So, of course, we're bringing. Matt is a special. Okay, I'll start with your biography. I was saving it for a little bit later, but I'll read it. I'll read it right now. So Matt is a high energy creative clinician who utilizes an eclectic approach to meet the specific needs of his clients. He specializes in working with children and adolescents, as well as their families, in providing therapy and conducting psychological evaluations. Dr. Matt is proud to serve as a consultant in schools, a professor at the university level, and a researcher and author on his specialty, giftedness. Dr. Matt thrives in supporting young people in understanding, developing, and celebrating their unique brains and ways of operating in their world. He is best known for his work with gifted individuals and in being an advocate for implementing high-level supports and understanding of gifted needs. He is a board member of the Pennsylvania Association for Gifted Education and active in multiple gifted organizations around the country.
Yep. That's me. Yeah.
Great story. And one of the things that I really have enjoyed about following you along and reading about your work and listening to you speak about your work is how you're one of these people that you actually see that you know what you're talking about because you've lived it.
Yes.
Yes. And to us, this is one of the doorways into the embodiment world. Yeah, so we value that a lot. Yeah. So Mark's work around giftedness is, to me, while researching this topic specifically, is one of the people that bring he's at the head, to me, of this research, not just on a research level, but on this is what works. And particularly around giftedness, this is, of course, you're gonna be speaking on this because you're the expert on it. But I really love that many of the solutions or the suggestions or the tips, or I don't know how you might call them, for people with this type of brain, right? Because it's not necessarily, giftedness is not necessarily about, oh, you're like super intelligent, right? Which is something that we're stepping away from, but it's owning what body you have and giving like very concrete solutions of how this might work in your life, how to integrate that into your life. Do you want to speak a little bit more around that?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a great place to jump in with, because, there are a million books, there are a million pieces of advices, there are a million blog posts, and there's all this information out there, but the information that has the most value is the information that is usable and usable to you, right? We're looking for that authentic connection, right? And, to me, it comes down to this idea of, I think of when I was thinking about embodiment, right, I was thinking about a gentleman I've been seeing for therapy for several years now. And he came in once and, we were talking about regulating and calming down. And he was saying, he's like, I don't want to do yoga. I don't like yoga. And he was sort of ranting and raving about that for a while. And after a while, I said, okay, so what makes you think you have to do yoga? Well, that's how you calm down, right? That's what people do. You have to do yoga. And I laughed. I said, there are hundreds of thousands of ways for you to calm down. So if you don't like yoga, guess what? You don't have to do yoga. And it's this idea of, having this flexibility to the sort of giant menu of stuff that's out there. This is where individuality matters, right? This is where your journey, your strengths, your weaknesses matter. Because my wife does yoga. She benefits from it greatly. I can't do yoga to save my life, right? I would much rather go for a walk. I would much rather, play some frisbee or shoot baskets and basketball. Like, those are the things that I use to calm myself down. So it's about giving yourself permission to play to your strengths and seek your joy, not just capital J joy that exists out in the universe, right? But like, what is the stuff that works for you? And once we identify those things, it's about getting you as much of that as we can handle to giving you the tools to self-regulate.
That sounds great. And when I hear this, I think this actually fits for everyone, not just those who want to deal with giftedness or any other type of issue around the way their brain works, right? So, and I think I've been a yoga teacher for, I don't know, 15 years. I don't know. And sometimes I no, today I don't want any sound music. I don't want to smell any candles. I want to go into the boxing ring.
Yes, right. Some days you want to hit the heavy bag, and some days you want to get into child's pose and put on some soft music, right? And it's about giving yourself permission to A, understand that we all contain multitudes, and then B, move in service of those multitudes, right? And I love that. Like, some days you just want to hit the heavy bag, and some days you want to do yoga.
Yeah. And I think one of the challenges around this, I don't know if this is something that you share with your example with this person. Sometimes we have to work through the idea of, I need to do this type of thing and it needs to look like this.
Yes. Right. Yeah. We download a lot of shoulds from the universe, right? It's like, this is what my family should look like. This is what work should look like. This is what success should look like. And the happiest people I know are the ones who self-define that stuff, and working with a gifted population and a neurodiverse population, probably the first conversation we end up having is that the way school is built here in America is not built for the brightest among us, right? School is very big into compliance. Like, you sit in the chair, you answer the questions, you do the math test, and after 12 years of that, they give you a diploma and they send you on your way. Thumbs up, good job. And when you have a divergent brain that zigs when everybody else zags, it's about finding an environment that supports that. And, and thankfully there are many ways to do that in this day and age, but it's about, playing to your strengths and following your passions. I mean, what works for the person down the street may or may not work for you. But the idea is, you have to give yourself the space and the grace to listen to the stuff that you need to. A lot of the clients I work with struggle with executive functioning, right? They struggle with time management, organization, knowing when to start, knowing when to stop, stuff like that. And inevitably, when that shows up at school or work, it shows up in areas that we don't want to work in, areas that we're already struggling in. So, Johnny is at school and he's struggling in math, and you need to work on your time management and organization in math. Well, Johnny is already in math and he already doesn't like math. So now we're going to ask him to do something he doesn't want to do in an environment he already is struggling in.
Yeah.
so we're betting against ourselves, right? It's like, okay, so we're going to ask you to do a difficult thing at a difficult time. I would much rather have Johnny learn executive functioning skills in the things he already wants to do, the things he's already good at. So if Johnny's a good soccer player, be like, okay, Johnny, organize your soccer bag. So, because you're motivated to do that. It's like, well, okay, my cleats are here, my shin guards are here. Where's my water bottle? My water bottle's there. Great, I'm good to go. And then it's like, you just did all the things I needed you to do. High five. Good job, Johnny. Because what we know about the brain is that the skills we place in one area will generalize to others, right? So it is not about what it's human nature to throw resources at a person or a situation when they're feeling worse and doing worse. I get it. It makes sense. You don't call the fire department if the building's not on fire. But to further the metaphor, you want to do stuff to keep fires from happening, and do that when things are calm and when you feel good, right? If you're really good at, taking care of yourself in a very particular way, I want more of that, because that's going to lift everything up, rather than just saying like, sure, you're good at these things, but we're not talking about this. We're talking about this thing over here. If you're a person, it's personal. And then you can build strengths from there.
That's great. Yeah, this is, I mean, to all of everyone who's listening, whether you're interested specifically in hearing about giftedness in particular. One of the things that I really love about listening to all of your work around giftedness is that it really applies to any or many, I mean, in general, of course, neurodiversities.
Yes.
And one of the things that I keep thinking as I read and I study more about these subjects is how this is the way that we're heading in all of the mental health, philosophy, or how can I thought, right? Let's say, because when I definitely encourage everybody to look at Matt's work, because he has a very nice way of mapping out like, okay, so this is the issue and this is how you can spread it out in your life. And if you put attention into these different areas, you will start seeing different results. So it's very concrete, very simple, right? Before you have this overview so nicely structured, it's like, what the hell's wrong with me?
I ask myself that question 3 or 4 times a day. So that's good.
And I love that how you approach this, and it's really it's very noticeable how you have digested all of this to be able to put it so simply in these like nice clean cut boxes. And then I think, well, actually this applies to the entire population, whether you identify as gifted or as any other neurodiversity or just human, because I think we're so far away from understanding how we work and how we are so different in a sense, of course, general human, but we have our different flavors. And this integrated life, this nourished and happy life will depend on, as you said, like defining ourselves, defining how happiness will look for me, how health will look for me according to my body, owning that and taking the steps towards that. Mm-hmm. But maybe we're not yet ready, institutional wise, in all of, as you say, educational, health, all of these different areas that help us get there. We're not yet ready to address how individual we also are, even within our generalities, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, the world is built for sort of a one size fits all, help the most people you can. And there are many manifestations of that work, right? I mean, this isn't, let's throw out the whole system, but when it comes to personal development, the research is overwhelmingly clear that individuation is the best way forward. And, this is sort of exactly the next step in what you're saying. The best practices in gifted education and mental health for gifted individuals are just best practices, full stop. We should give everybody more choice. We should play to everybody's strengths. We should allow for more customization and flexibility, because that's when people do best. That's exactly, even think about this, like we're recording a podcast right now. Part of the reason podcasts are great is the inherent choice that's implied in them. I listen to podcasts while I drive. Some people do it while they're at the gym. Some people do it while they're going for a walk. Some people sit at their office desk and because it's work and I'm listening to this podcast and I'm working. But it isn't, oh, it's on at 8 p.m. on the TV. You better be sitting on the couch at 8 p.m. on the TV. It's, we've opened the door to choice and we're never going back, thankfully, right? So let's embrace it. Let us, steer into that. So if you are, wherever you are listening to this, right, give yourself a high five for for listening to choice and then following through on it, because that individuality is what makes consumption of anything better. And you are putting the practices that we're talking about into action, and you didn't even know you're doing it. So you're already taking steps. Good for you.
Let's give ourselves some credit for the day. So Matt, we can segue a little bit into trauma because of what we're saying.
Right.
One of the things that really got my attention one time that I was listening to you speaking was how, given these conditions of our brains, whether that's giftedness or ADHD or any other sort of neurodiversity, how trauma will land differently and will affect a person with a certain specific neurodiversity, will affect them differently, right?
Yeah. And, when we think about trauma, we think about the mind-body connection, right? Like the classic text, the body keeps the score, right? I have it on my shelf. I've read it 50 times, right? And one of the things that we have to consider when thinking about trauma through a neurodivergent lens is the different ways that mind-body connection manifests in neurodivergent individuals. So to pick one example, and we could pick many, right? The prefrontal cortex, sort of right here on your brain, right above your eyes, in the front part of your head, that's your seat of your executive functioning, right? That's the brake to the high-powered engine your brain has. And it's what regulates our behavior, inhibits our behavior when we need to inhibit it, right? You're at work, your boss says something stupid. You could say, you're an idiot, boss, but you want to keep your job. So you don't say that. That's the prefrontal cortex in action. But when we have trauma, that part of your brain gets overwhelmed more easily, right? And then in many aspects of neurodiversity, including autism, ADHD, giftedness, the prefrontal cortex is underdeveloped. It comes online later in life. So we have more thoughts, more feelings coming through a system that is underprepared to regulate that stuff. We have to consider that. It's like, well, just do better, just have a stronger prefrontal cortex. Sure, if I had a stronger prefrontal cortex, I wouldn't need this intervention, right? It's a circular reasoning that hurts kids and clients, right? It says, I'm going to help you build this brake, the brake for the car that is your brain. And if we're starting at step one, then that's where we start. That's so be it, right? I worked with a gentleman, this was many years ago. He was a Vietnam veteran, and he had suffered a tremendous trauma while he was in country. Lost most of his platoon. And when he would have that traumatic response, right, his move would be to throw himself to the ground wherever he was. And sometimes that put him in physical danger, right? If you're walking down the sidewalk and you throw yourself into the street, you're putting yourself in danger. So it wasn't, hey, stop that, right? Because my goodness, he would stop it if he could, right? It was about, how do we give you clues and tips and tricks to pay more attention to when those cues are coming. So instead of throwing yourself to the floor, maybe you sit down, right? Maybe you find a bench, right? You do something else, because that's what we call in the mental health world harm reduction. It's not don't do it, it's do the safest version of the thing that's available to you, right? And appreciating that mind body connection allows us to plan a harm reduction response in a way that feels authentic and approachable, not just don't do it, but given these options available to you, what's the safest choice?
Respecting this intelligence of the body, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because
Yeah.
even though it doesn't make sense if you were just looking from the outside and without context, like, why would you do that? And as you said, just stop it. But there is a very intelligent part of the body that's saying this is what makes sense to whatever your body is thinking, your brain is thinking to try to solve in this moment. That's the best option, right?
Right. And we live in a society that largely doesn't honor or make space for the mind-body connection. I mean, I think we are very out of tune with our bodies, right? And I'm as guilty as this as most, but it's the sort of thing that, and I tell this story a lot. So several years ago, I went to speak at a conference out in Chicago, and my wife decided to come with me because she has family out that way. So I lived in Philadelphia at the time, got up at 5 a.m. in Philadelphia, took a cab to the airport, took a flight from Philadelphia to Chicago, got another cab, took that cab to the hotel, got into the hotel, packed our bags. Okay. Now it's around 1:30 Chicago time, which is 2:30 in my body. And I've had one breakfast and I've gotten up early and I've been on a flight. I'm hungry, but I'm not paying attention to that right now because I'm trying to figure out how the light switch in this hotel room works. It was one of those, you have to put the card in the slot for the light to work. I don't travel a lot, so I had never seen that before. So I'm stomping around the hotel room like a lion in a cage. And my wife's like, hey, how you feeling? I'm like, I'm mad. Oh, like, because I was focused, blinders on for the problem in front of me, not the emotional or biological context that impacted how I was feeling, right? I was mad because I felt out of control. I needed to do this one little thing to be able to do all the things I wanted to do. And part of the reason I was so out of control is that I wasn't paying attention to what my body needed. If I had had a cereal bar or an apple or a banana or fill in the blank, right, I would have had more resources to combat this problem. So oftentimes when parents will say to me in therapy, they'll be, my kid has these problems at these times and we need to fix it. The first question I always ask is, what's the context around the problem? Is it a particular teacher? Does the problem have to happen after lunch, after school, late at night, early in the morning? And it amazes me how often those contextual questions give us clues. So when your child gets up early, has a long day of school, come back, and you immediately whisk them off to ballet class, and then they come home from ballet and have to do homework, and then they freak out when it's dinner time, maybe that's less a personal problem and more a systemic problem, right? We're not letting that person rest. We're not feeding that person, rushing from beep, so the kid expresses that discomfort and that disconnect the only way kids know how, which is to have a tantrum or a meltdown. And if we only focus on that behavior and we miss the context around it, we make that a personal problem, not a systemic problem. And systemic problems offer us solutions that are a little bit easier to acclimate to than something that's wholly personal.
I love that you touch upon this subject of systemic, right? Because within this, and particularly you that work with children, when parents hear trauma will affect a neurodiverse child differently, can go both ways, right? Like either scared like out of you, and like make you feel like maybe afraid or super responsible, which might be good because it gets you on sort of a responsibility track of something, right? Of course, I'm not saying that we are entirely responsible of what happens in our environment, but it definitely gives you the power to do something about it, right? And to acknowledge that, as I've heard in the gifted community, it's really important to label, to diagnose, not necessarily to carry the label or live with the label, but to know how to handle yourself, to know. Sometimes I think that life, independently of neurodiversity or not, this healing and developmental work is developing our own user manual.
Yes, I love that.
So in a sense, as parents, it's great to be able to go into these subjects that may not be easy or comfortable, particularly at first, right? But it's definitely a great way to be able to do what's best. We cannot avoid trauma in ourselves or in children, right? But once we know how that's gonna affect us, that's the best way to actually do something about it, and either prevent it whenever that's possible, because some of that's preventable, actually, right? But if it does happen, and if it had happened, to be able to know how to address it best.
Yeah.
So that this is when labels, there's this movement against labels, but there's also a good thing about labels, right? When I don't necessarily self-identify and base all of my identity around it, but use it for a way to integrate myself into that life that I'm craving.
Right. And that piece of it, right? The power of labels, it's about the label that works for you. I mean, my diagnostic chart for my therapy clients might say all these things, but the words I use for my clients are often much different, because it's about the term that we are focusing our work around, right? So, I can't diagnose someone with low self-confidence, right? That's not a thing that exists in the diagnostic manual. So if I'm calling that depression or social anxiety or whatever, but if my client wants to work on self-confidence, then you better believe I'm working on self-confidence, right? Labels can be organizing principles, and they allow us to have a shared language and a shared set of goals, but also they serve to externalize the problem. It's not me, it's this thing I have, right? I have low self-confidence, right? And it's a thing I can carry with me, but it's a thing I can also choose to put down, right? And when it comes to neurodiversity, the brain you have is the brain you have, and it defines a lot of things you are. But saying I'm a neurodivergent person allows you to place more things that you do, more things you think, more things that you feel in a contextual frame that says neurodivergent people, these are things that happen. And you go, that's me. That's the box I live in. So it's not my personal feelings. It's, oh, my brain works differently.
Yeah.
It doesn't, I'm fond of saying your different brain doesn't provide excuses. It provides context, right? If you have a weaker prefrontal cortex, you're more likely to shout out answers in class, right? That it's not going to make your peers any less frustrated, but it allows us the context to say, there's a reason for this. Let's build structures and supports around that idea, because it flows from a place of knowledge. And then we use that, we actualize it.
That's great. I love that. I love the sound of that. And we could really spend hours talking about each of these points that we're touching upon. I would love to step into a little bit of a difficult, not difficult, but like tricky territory, just for
let's do it. Come on, I'm here for it.
So we'll be speaking about how recognizing our neurodiversity in our children, or whatever, your students, your patients, and how maybe our treatment will differ, right? Either as practitioners or as clients, patients, how maybe, that didn't work because I have this particular need, right?
Mhm.
But then as now that you're mentioning labels and the power of labels, one thing that is also starting to be talked about, is that the right word to say it? Yeah. I mean, you start hearing about this is when there are different diagnoses or when different labels, because this is very common, right?
Yes, very.
Mhm.
And I think in those moments, the power of labels is the access they give you to systems and treatment that comes from those systems, right? I've organized my therapy practice, and when I give talks, I try to organize my talks around this idea is that it's about skill building, right? We meet a person where they are, and we say, here are the things you tell me you want to work on. Here are the skills I can give you to work on those things, right? It is a meeting in need. So because if I look up depression in the diagnostic manual, one of the symptoms of depression is sleeping too much. One of the symptoms of depression is sleeping not enough. So you tell me, right? Like, so the idea here is we have to conceptualize what a individual version of that label means, right? To say, Sally is autistic gives me some information, but it doesn't tell me nearly enough about who Sally is and what Sally needs to do or not do. Right. And that's why the idea of saying I have low self-confidence. Well, what does that mean? Where does it show up? How does it show up? Are you somebody who deals with it by overcompensating and be like, I'm going to be the center of attention? Or are you someone who deals with it by undercompensating and hiding? Right. If I can't build an effective intervention until I know what that world is for you. And that gets back to that mind-body connection. You know, I have, you know, I am a very extroverted person, right? I do very good in front of a crowd. I do good with people. Those are things I do well. There are also times where I can over extrovert and get so overstimulated, right? That I need to power down. I need to decompress. And what I have found is now that I know that about myself and how my brain and body work, it allows me to be kinder to myself, right? So I can go and say, if I'm at a conference and people keep talking to me, asking me questions, which I love, I absolutely love, it's, you know what? I'm a little bit overstimulated. I need to take 10 minutes. I need to go have a nice coffee and sit on my couch or sit in a quiet space and just re-regulate for 10 minutes. So why don't you come and find me in 15 minutes, right? Why don't you come and do that? Because it isn't a personal failing. It isn't me failing to step up. It's not me failing to step up. It's my body telling me, hey, this is a thing you need,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. It's no different than being hungry or tired or thirsty. It's no different than needing a hug or an attaboy or needing to zone out into your phone and watch, bad reality television on Netflix for a minute. They're all things that feed our, yeah, right? Guilty. Give me a cooking show any day. I'm going to watch it. But those are things that feed our soul. And the more we are in touch with our bodies, the more we are able to pick the things that feed our souls. And how that connects back to this question of multiple diagnoses and misdiagnoses and the labels we have versus the labels we use is that the way we define these things for ourselves puts us in a position to then seek things that we need, right? So a lot of times my job will say, hey, you have ADHD. This is what ADHD is. This is how it shows up. Now, people are going to tell you that you need to do A, B, and C, right? Super, on the surface, it's great level advice. Does that work for you? And then they say no, because they wouldn't be talking to me if it was working for them. Say, great, because the A, B, and C never work. Now, X, Y, and Z over here have a fighting chance. And here's how we make that work for you, right? Because it's not ADHD, it's Patricia's ADHD. It's not giftedness, it's Dr. Matt's giftedness. It's not depression, it's Frank's depression. We have to take the person's history and brain and body, and systems into account and designing the things they're going to need to get better fastest.
That was lovely. Because
Oh, good.
as I hear this, is like, yes, it's a person in front of
Yeah.
you, right? It's not a label or a steps of how to get yourself out of this.
Step
You know,
4.
yeah,
Right.
don't be what you have been for the past,
Right.
like 20, 40, 50 years, right? Because I mean, many of us know that we will not really get away from our diversity or our stuff, just get better at handling it.
Mm-hmm.
And adjusting the rough spots and the rough edges, or enjoying the edges when you learn how to do that, if that's possible, right? So I love this human and very person oriented perspective, because I think this is what heals at the end of the day. And you were mentioning how, particularly in giftedness, people are like, when you say, oh, just do it differently, and you should think your way out of, oh, don't react like this, or just, don't say this. And particularly with people labeled with giftedness, it's like, oh, if you're so smart,
Yeah, right.
be able to get out of this.
Yeah. Yep.
So it's like, if it's difficult for, like just a person without a label, with all of these social attributions to, you should be able to get over this minor thing that happened.
Yes.
And your whole, limbic system is like,
yeah. And this is, I mean, you made so many good points. I want to address two. So the first is this idea of should, right? So this has been a very good podcast so far. We're doing a lot of good stuff. But my friends, if you take nothing else away from this, and I hope you take a lot, is that once you take the word should from your vocabulary, crumble it up into a ball and throw it in the garbage, right? The word should does not help you. It punishes you for stuff you haven't done yet. You want to take the word should and make it the word could, right? Because should is could plus shame, right? Patricia, do me a favor. Are you, you say you've been a yoga teacher, right? Yeah. Are you the best yoga teacher?
No.
No. I can't even fathom what a yoga competition would look like, how we would figure that out. But your brain in a darker moment might say, well, you've been doing this for 10 some odd years, right? Shouldn't you be the best yoga teacher? Right. And
I should be.
Clearly, right? How dare you not be the best yoga teacher? But that's the brilliance of making space for having your own story, is that ultimately the race is long and it's only with yourself, right? There is no external thing to pass here, right? You could be the world's best yoga teacher. If you want to be, then you can think about the things you need to do to get there. If you want to be and you're not, you can think about the things that are getting in your way. But ultimately, it allows you more self-compassion, right? It puts you on a developmental growth curve that just goes forever and ever and ever. Because the best thing about it is there's no finish line. Every time I give a talk, every time I give a podcast, every time I go to a conference and watch other people talk, I learn, I get things, I level up. And I know I wouldn't be able to do that if I was sitting there and be like, I should be as good at this. I should be as good a speaker as Scott Barry Kaufman, or I should be as knowledgeable as Joy Lawson Davis. Well, maybe I could be those things, right? But I'm also me. And my individuality matters in making the broader calculations of who and what we want to be.
Yeah. And I think this might sound like a mixture of my own like labels or something, because I used to be a lifetime ago a very perfectionist, and at some point I think I over drove that car, and it was like, wait, if I do it all myself, it might not be the most perfect, because that means that I define perfect, and that's not perfect.
Yeah. Mind blown, right?
And that was like, okay, I need to step back. And then of course you find yourself, and you find the colors that define you, and it's like, this is what comes out of me naturally, and that's great. If I want to improve, that's great, but what comes from me, that has value in itself, right?
And I would even say it has the most value, because when we feel better, we do better. And when we feel better, we actually lift other people up with us. So, this isn't permission to do whatever you want whenever you want. This is not that kind of podcast, but it is permission to say, the people and places and things that make me feel best about myself are the things that I should be seeking and chasing and doing, because the best version of myself will show up from those spaces. Someone with a history of trauma has had meaningful connection ripped from them, right? Whether it, was an abusive thing, which, choice was involved, or it was accidental trauma, right? But safety was ripped away from you. And the only way to repair that loss is connection, right? It's meaningful integration into communities, into systems, into work, so, and you think about it, right? When we're doing our best, we feel supported and connected with others who share our visions and share our goals. When we do our worst, we feel isolated and adrift. There's a big difference from feeling isolated and taking some alone time, right? That's a fundamental difference. You can be alone in a crowded room if you're with the wrong people, or you can feel full of love sitting having lunch with your best friend, right? But it's about those meaningful connections. And once again, understanding that you're the person who gets to define what meaningful connection looks like for you.
That's one of the things that I wanted to touch upon also today, Matt, because I know that this is part of the work that you do, and it's lovely that you bring it up, because one of the parts of the healing process of trauma is resourcing, right? Mm-hmm. And you're not alone, which trauma makes you feel that it's only you floating into, yep, the world. Yeah. So it's bringing those elements back. And I love the way that you start mentioning, like, this is what you need, this is what you need, this is what you need. This might be ways that you might need that depending on, your diversity, your neurodiversity. And it's a way to actually own and take action into the planning out this resourcing that I think is, it's a very important part of trauma healing, but it's also the way to life, just fulfilling life in general. So, it's lovely to see how you shape all of these different flavors of how your relationship might look like, how your life might look like, how your hobbies, right? Because you mentioned that a lot. Do you want to talk about this part?
So definitely let's talk about hobbies for a moment, right? So one of the most interesting things that I've read recently was the book Girls Stop Apologizing from Rachel Hollis. And I did not think that I would enjoy it. It's not the kind of book I usually read, but my wife really liked it. And I said, okay. And she gives herself 1 hour a day for time for her to use. It's sacred time, right? And she's like, I will use that time for yoga. I will use that time for writing. I will use that time to sit in the sun, right? And maybe not everybody has 5 hours a week. Maybe you can only do 3. But the idea of having that sacred personal time, you can build a meaningful life and add a lot of value to your personal journey and your recovery by adding that kind of time in, because we're all too busy, we're all overworked, we're all overstimulated, like all those things are true. So you might think, well, when things calm down, I'll write that book or play golf or learn to windsurf or learn to make a ceviche or, or hit the heavy bag, right? but the time is never coming. It lives in the magical land of later. The magical land of later, it doesn't exist. So we need to actively give ourselves that time, because the work's never going to end, which can handcuff us or free us. Because if it's never going to end, we'll never finish it. So you might as well take 3 hours a week to take a yoga class. You know, your house will never be clean, friends. I'm sorry. It just never will be. Right.
That's the nature.
Yeah. You know, and there will never be, you'll never finish all the books you want to read, and you'll never get to the bottom of Netflix. So take those 3 to 5 hours a week that you give yourself and say, I'm going to take a stand-up comedy class, because when I do stand-up comedy, I feel good. I feel alive and lit up and inspired, because, you know, one of the things I say a lot, and this is where I think this whole conversation comes from, is that things can be therapeutic without being therapy, right? I think a big piece of what I try to tell people in the therapy space is, listen, I get you 1 hour a week, right? Some people 1 hour every other week. That is not enough time. There are many, many, many hours in a week that I don't see you. So instead, let's talk about the things we can add to your life that are therapeutic when you're not talking to me, right? And if that is, I get 2 hours a week to watch The Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, then pour yourself a glass of Chardonnay and lock the door, right? By all means, do it, right? That's great, because it feeds your soul, right? And I think that, you know, and I think that those 3 to 5 hours that you carve out for yourselves are an opportunity that screams for community, right? And as an extroverted person, I would want to be around other people for my community. But if you're an introverted person, or you're socially anxious, or your community exists online, then play those cards. That's fine. You know, if you want to spend those 3 to 5 hours a week playing intense online chess, by all means, you know, I wish you nothing but the best. You will leave me in the dust very quickly. I'm not very good at chess, but that's okay. The value comes from the choices we make that put ourselves centered, not from that should, or this is what it's supposed to look like. You know, your recovery is your journey. Just like the treatment should be individualized, the systems that we connect to should be individualized. You know,
I love how you put it, choice towards centeredness.
Yeah.
I think that's beautiful, because as you mentioned earlier, it's not necessarily choice for, you know, like freedom, and in this type of freedom where I have no responsibilities and I stop being an adult and a functioning member of civilization. Right?
Right.
So I like this way of phrasing it, choice towards centeredness.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, one of the, we talk about this often in the embodiment life and the embodiment exploration, how also sexuality plays an important role in the integration of a healthy nervous system, of a healthy lifestyle. And so sometimes we need to explore as a hobby. Sometimes I love reading like super dense books about the brain, but I also love to read, you know, these books about, you know, a novel where you know, bridesmaids, whatever story, you know, like
yeah.
because I need that differentiation, you know. Sometimes when I love reading these very dense academic books, it starts getting dry, you know, like when you're
very heavy
leftovers. But and then sometimes you need something different, and this applies to hobbies, this applies to friendships, right? Because I've also heard you mention you need the friends that you discuss this very deep intellectual stuff with, but then you also need those that you might be goofy around or sporty around, or whatever it is that you need, again, towards centering. Yeah. And also in sexuality, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I talk a lot about sex in my job, and I'm often flattered and encouraged and a little mystified that this is a space, this is one of the few spaces where people feel like they can talk about sex, you know. And I mean, you know, sex is the mental health equivalent of cupcakes. I mean, it is a flavor bomb. It's a dopamine bomb. It's good, and and that includes masturbation. I mean, like if you don't have a partner or partners, right, then exploring your sexuality in that way, and but it really is it's an avenue towards self-care and healing that I think is underutilized and under talked about. And I mean, I can't speak for the rest of the world, but certainly in America we have our hangups about that, and I'm slowly trying to knock down those walls as best I can. But I mean, that is a big piece of your journey towards healing, right? So and don't think of it as a yes or no question, like, do I want to include sexuality or not? Think about, to what extent do I want to, right? Do I want how much of this do I want? Do I want to take a class where I'm dancing and I feel sexy when I dance, right? Or do I want to look better naked? Or do I want to have more sexual partners, right? Those are all things that are broadly part of sexuality that hit that individuality and recovery model, because you're centering yourself, right? And if you say, like, actually, that's less important to me, then we slide it down the hierarchy, right? That's fine. But you've had that conversation with yourself, because one of the ways to really reconnect with your body is to listen to those more fundamental urges of hunger, thirst, and arousal and desire, right? And for many people, that becomes a door back into reconnection and loving yourself again, because it's this, oh, right, that was a thing that I did, or that is a thing I can do, that a great amount of joy springs from.
That's a nice way to put it. Yeah. And recognizing, it's very interesting what you mentioned. Lots of things that you mentioned are very interesting. How it's not so talked about when it can be such a healing thing.
Mm-hmm.
And you mostly hear this from, like Eastern traditions, that you think that you gotta go join that club of like,
right.
Weird. I mean, I can say that because I was one of those people at some point, or maybe I still am.
Yeah.
To learn about these things and to connect with the healing power, I'm air quoting this, healing power of sexuality. And as you say, sexuality is not necessarily a sexual act,
right,
but it's all of the things that fly around that. It's how I dress. It's not necessarily that I dress in short skirts, but that I enjoy what I'm wearing, that I feel comfortable in what I'm wearing, and that starts shining through, because I'm connecting to, as you say, pleasure at the end of the day. And pleasure or arousal, as you connected more with our body response, that's a way to start connecting into a healing process that we need to touch upon every day. And as you mentioned, thirst, and as you mentioned, hunger, it's things that, I ate yesterday, so I don't need to eat today. Or I had water 2 months ago, I don't need water today.
Yeah.
The same is the issue with sexuality, of our pleasure, or feeling good with your body in a pleasure connected way. And this, as you say, it will look differently for a lot of people. And within the trauma lens, it's very interesting to explore how you mentioned how it's such a big source of dopamine and of healing power. And it's usually one of the first things that gets cut off when there's trauma, right?
Yeah.
So it's so strong. It's so powerful to acknowledge how we get cut off with one of our own, it's powers of healing that's already installed in your body, right?
And we want to make space in this conversation for people who are survivors of sexual trauma, right? I mean, because that obviously complicates that relationship. But once again, it's not a yes or no question. It's not a light switch, right? It's not, well, because this terrible thing happened to me, I am not allowed to experience that pleasure ever again. Or I have to now experience pleasure a different way. And And there are professionals and programs and support that allow you to reconnect with those aspects of your body that were taken, right? And that is not your fault. And it's, I mean, and so we, by having this conversation, I don't mean by any stretch of the imagination to put the onus on you to get healed and reclaim your sexuality, but it's more opening your mind, opening your heart to this space that sexuality could hold in your recovery journey, right? Because we can't pretend it doesn't exist. That's leading to problems down the line. It's, let's own it, let's talk about it. And if it's as simple as talking about it, so I know, because I know I'm not ready to talk about it yet, then you've done a tremendous service to your mind and your body, because you're saying that through talking about it, I am acknowledging where I am in my own personal journey towards getting where I want to go.
Thank you for mentioning that, Matt. And yes, as we have mentioned also at other points during this talk today, I think it's very clear to me and to Matt, I presume, but of course we need to say it even more, state it more clearly, that trauma is and healing around trauma, and it's not necessarily, it will have to look this way. Right. And this is when you're healed, and you have to get there in order to be labeled, now you're trauma free,
Yeah.
And it's really touching upon, it's like getting on a certain highway, not necessarily getting somewhere. And particularly with this issue around sexuality, because it's a delicate, and it's delicate because it's so powerful, it's so close to your body, it's so close to who you can connect to, who you are through sexuality. And I would say, when there's trauma around sexuality and we feel so fearful to start touching upon that, it's not that we are afraid to touch the trauma. It's that the thing itself, that the event itself, is what's powerful. Mm-hmm. I don't mean to diminish it, right? No. But what's powerful, it's what you will find there. Yeah. This strength of connection with your body. But again, the idea is not to force yourself to get there, but it's to start to touch upon that power that lies around that. And sometimes it's saying, I don't want any of that right now. Yeah. And that's super healing enough and super powerful enough, right?
Yeah. Well, and trauma has the function of making us time blind, right? Like, either the past is back and it's here and it's in our face right now, or it's this, I'm like this now and I will never be better, I will never be healed, and that's the magic of words like right now, or yet, or at this time, because you are injecting a timeline into a timeline situation. You are saying, because your brain is going panic, 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 it's going to be like this forever. And if you can say to it gently, like, I feel this way right now, I don't know when that story will end, but I can acknowledge I feel this way right now, but I am paying attention to the right now part. I mean, think about it. If you've been broken up with heinously, if you've been dumped or cheated on, or, and your brain naturally is like, oh, I'm never going to find love. That's the end for me. Right. But then after a little while, you got back out there, you went on some dates, and probably some of them were bad. Right. And, you maybe had some sex, and maybe some of that was bad. But after a while, you were doing things your brain was telling you a while ago you were never going to do. So we are doing so much more. We've come so much further than we ever give ourselves credit for. And so much of this work is not just seeing where you have left to go, but it's turning your head back and looking how far you've come. See yourself on a staircase, right? We're walking up, which means that whether we, regardless of where we are on the staircase, we are walking up, we are moving in a direction. And it's very easy to top down and be like, well, here's where I want to be, and look how far I am all the way down there. I would say invert that. You know where your goal is, and as long as you're on the staircase, you're doing something. And that is that is a gift you can give yourself, and it doesn't require adding anything to the circumstance. You are just training your brain to give yourself more credit for everything you are doing and have done.
And as I hear you say this, Matt, I think of what you brought up at the beginning about self-defining what success is. And I always love to close my conversations whenever I touch into this deep stuff around trauma and healing, is that for anyone who has been in the self-development path for a little bit of time, you see that of course it requires work. It's not easy. It would be a lie to say, oh, it's super simple, there's no pain involved. It is a path, and if it were easy, everybody would be healed right now today, right? But at the same time, once you realize that it takes time and it's a lifelong process, then it's all this is how I love to share a frame around this, that this is the life we have. So while we're doing the work, while we're doing the hard work, this is also a time we have to enjoy it with what we have, with the tools that we have. So we might as well, like, we have a party with 2 cupcakes and 2 slices of pizza, and the tacos might get here or they may not, but this is what we have. So we can't wait for the party to have everything perfectly, nicely ordered to enjoy it, or we can start adding some of that level of enjoyment now.
I love it.
Yeah. What would you like to close this conversation today, Matt, with?
I mean, first by thanking you. I mean, Patricia, I had high expectations for this, and I think we exceeded them. I think we did great. I think to close, it's this idea of the best gift you can give yourself is time to be with yourself, right? And if that takes the form of therapy or yoga or windsurfing or kickboxing or whatever that is, see it as a gift, right? And if that part of your brain is yelling at you going, that's selfish, that's selfish, that's selfish. Well, you know what? You can't be selfless without being selfish. You have to take care of yourself first. It's easy to say, hard to believe, but you cannot pour from an empty cup, right? So the way that we take care of ourselves just enhances so many pieces of our lives. So if your self-care for today was listening to this podcast, then bravo you. I'm proud of you. Listen to it again tomorrow, right? Because that's the gift we give ourselves. And this is a journey, and it's complicated, and it's challenging, and it's worth it. So I hope that we've inspired you to take those steps and to, reconnect with those parts of yourself that need that love and compassion, and understand that this is a very personal journey, and it's allowed to be.
Thank you, Matt. That's a great way to close. And definitely, I think I have felt inspired by you, and I'm sure that we will reach people who will also feel inspired by what you have shared today. And with this idea of we are very different in a sense, and that there's healing possible. And if some healing modalities haven't worked for you, that there are still ways that it might work, right?
Still ways, yes.
So if you're interested in knowing more about Matt's work, and definitely I would encourage you to get involved and get a sense of this. I love the word that you used to define your work as eclectic, which to my understanding is adaptable,
Yes.
to humanity. Do visit his website. That's Dr. Matt Zakreski. So Dr. Matt, MATT, CAKRESKI.com. Thank you, Matt, so much.
Thank you.